What's up, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Well Man's Podcast. My name is Brian Brosey. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Keoni Tita. Keoni, how are you today?
Doing wonderful. I'm really excited about the topic we're talking about today. It's one of the things that kind of keeps me on board, keeps me focused. And the topic really is about Stoicism and resilience. And we kind of always hit on Stoicism in quite a few of our podcasts, I guess.
Yeah.
And the main one that we did was with Jade, and it was episode 13. On Stoicism and how he uses it in his life. And I thought it was really eye-opening, and it caused me to, look more into it. And I've always been a big fan of Stoicism anyway, but just for people, if they want more information on this stuff,
Okay.
There's a book out there. It's a great book. It's called How to Be a Stoic in the Modern Day, but How to Be a Stoic. It's by Massimo Pigliucci. And another great one, which we've talked about or at least referenced on some of our podcasts, is The Obstacle is the Way, or Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday.
Yeah.
And if you want to hear more about Massimo and his talks on Stoicism, there's a great podcast out there called Philosophize This. He was actually interviewed in episode 55. And he hits on that. And then he also has a really good TED Talk on it too. But I think the thing that attracts, people to Stoicism in modern day, and, especially me and you, Brian, is I just think Stoicism just provides a rich armamentarium of strategies and different techniques that you can apply, in the modern day. I mean, it basically gives you a lot of tools for psychological resilience.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
I think a lot of people, unfairly or think a lot of wrong things about Stoicism. That's basically that, you're basically,
Like unfazed, unemotional.
Yeah, you're unfazed. You don't have any emotions or anything like that, right? And that's just simply not true. The other thing I also want to say about it, so people will know, I mean, the most effective psychological tool that we have today, and it has the most research on it, is cognitive behavioral therapy. And it is completely based on Stoicism. It stems from Stoicism, and it has the strongest evidence and strongest scientific support of any modern form of psychological therapy. So those are just kind of the things that I just want to say about it before we kind of get into our
Do you
talk.
know what a cognitive behavioral therapy like session or what that looks like, Keoni? Like what that means?
Yeah, it's basically kind of hits on the main points of Stoicism. And I would say those points are, well, I'd say the main points when we're talking about resilience is understanding that, you don't have control over external events, but you do have control over internal events, right? So meaning you have control over how you perceive those events and how you think about them.
Right.
So basically what it allows you to do is it gives you, with a therapist, it basically, the therapist being an unbiased, counselor, hears you state what's going on and then reflects back on you, how they, different ways of looking at it. And I think it ultimately comes down to, let go of what you don't have control over and hold on to the things that you do have control over. And therefore it eases stress and anxiety, helps with all kinds of fears that you're confronted with. And that's really kind of what I want to talk about. I mean, the other thing it does is it definitely lets you look at the big picture of things going on, and Stoicism hits on that quite a bit. It's like when you can really contemplate your place in the world, are you conflating these negative things that are going in your life and making them bigger than what they are with how big the world is,
Yeah,
that type of
absolutely.
thing.
I mean, what we're going through now is a perfect example of that.
Right.
Micro to the macro level.
Right. Right. The other thing that I think that, and we'll hit on this, but I think a really good thing to do to ask yourself when you're confronted with decisions is, find a moral compass or guide. And what I mean by that is, or maybe find like a hero figure or a mentor figure, and then ask yourself what they would do in those situations. So, I mean, it could be anything. It could be, I don't know, it could be your favorite superhero. It could be a person in history. It could be, it could be Jesus Christ. It could be Buddha. It could be any of that. And you ask yourself, what would they do in this particular situation? And if you can contemplate that, you end up just being a better human,
Yeah,
not only
absolutely.
to others around you, but mostly to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe Rogan has this saying, the comedian, that imagine your life is one of those hero movies or one of those action movies, and you're the hero. What would you do now in this
Right.
situation? Like, what does a hero do at this point? Because the most important decision is that next one. That's something I'm
Yeah.
trying to be mindful of, is while I'm trying to keep my focused in the midst of all this and staying at home and everything like that, it's just the next decision is the most important one. So even if I messed up yesterday or I messed up the day before, all that matters is what literally I choose to do at the very next moment.
Yeah. Stoicism has a lot to say about that. It's basically, what's done is done, and it's illogical to keep living in the past. You have to learn from what happened in the past and then improve upon that
Right. And
later.
I, part of exactly off that, and something I think we talked about it when we had Jade on for that episode. And it's something I've taken with me since then, is just kind of meditating on, in moments where I'm super stressed, is meditating on other moments of extreme human resilience. Like
Mm.
during this time, Keoni, I've been obsessing over like learning about the Pacific theater during World War II
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff. And just thinking about, like, I watched it's a show on HBO called The Pacific. I listened to a bunch of podcasts, really delve deep into the Pacific theater, and just to imagine basically a guy my age in the
Mm-hmm.
40s and 30s sitting on an island, like a small little island in the Pacific, for 30, 40 straight days, enduring pure hell, just
Mm-hmm.
constant shelling, constant attacks, not clean water, not clean this. And people
Mm-hmm.
came home and came back to normal life somehow.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm a little upset and nervous about the coronavirus.
Yeah, yeah. It's like putting it in context. I mean, yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think about the people who stormed the beaches in Normandy in D-Day. What the hell was going through their mind? I mean,
And I'm nervous
how
for a
did
test.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, so the thing is when you're confronted by that, it's like it goes back to this whole thing. People are not disturbed. You have to get it in your head. A stoic would say, don't get disturbed by external events, but rather by your judgments about those events. That's what you should work on. So you have control over that.
Right.
You have control over the internal. You don't have control over the external. That's a very, very important thing to get over. So it's critical to know what you can control and what you can't. So you can't control, if you get coronavirus. I mean, in the reality of things, we don't know a lot about it. I mean, we can do what we know, and you can probably take preventive measures, but there's still risks that you can get that. So once you do, how do you deal with it? It's illogical to be like going, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed out, I'm gonna die. What you do is you use it to kind of rally your emotional fortitude to get through it, which
Yeah.
then affects your physical fortitude, actually.
Right.
And you're
Yeah.
not in fear mode about that.
Right. And I know Tim Ferriss uses like an exercise from Stoic philosophy. I'm not sure which Stoic philosophizer like kind of came up with this exercise, but kind of, he calls it fear setting, but imagining that worst case possible and really, really meditating on that worst case possible. And then the outcomes of that, what do you do at that point? And then it just kind of provides some clarity in the muddiness of what, now there's a million possible options that could happen or a million things that could go wrong. But when you really break it down to the worst possible option, what would that look like? And you would probably be okay at this point.
Yeah, I want to, and that's great. I want to say something on that because actually it's kind of a good quote by Marcus Aurelius, one of the famous Stoics. And he said this. He said, begin each day by telling yourself, today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness, all of them due to the offender's ignorance of what is good or evil. But for my part, I have long perceived the nature of good and its nobility, the nature of evil and its meanness, and also the nature of the culprit himself, who is my brother, not in any physical sense, but as a fellow creature similarly endowed with reason and a share of the divine. Therefore, none of those things can injure me, for nobody can implicate me in what is degrading. Neither can I be angry with my brother or fall foul of him, for he and I were born to work together like a man's two hands, feet, or eyelids, or the upper and lower rows of his teeth. To obstruct each other is against nature's law, and what is irritation or aversion but a form of obstruction. So basically, there's a couple things he's saying in this, as far as I understand it. He's basically reminding himself of the possible things that he can be confronted with negatively, okay, during the day. So he's prepared. He's kind of prepared. He's just reminding himself of doing that. Then he reminds himself that whatever he's confronted with, especially if we're talking about human connection, that person or whoever has done the ill deed, so to speak, may not necessarily be an ill deed, okay, at least from that perspective. And also that person or that animal or that event is part of a big cosmic picture. So who is it for you to say that shouldn't have happened? There's some arrogance in that kind of to speak,
Yeah, absolutely. A self-inflation kind of
right. And the other thing I want to hit on is, people would look at that, especially the first part of that quote, and say, well, that's really being pessimistic, that you're focusing on negative things throughout the day. And it's not really that. You're just reminding yourself of what may happen. It's analogous to buying life insurance, right? It doesn't mean you want to die, but it means that you recognize realistically what may happen and can happen to you. Like I could go out in my street today, or somebody could break in my house and kill me. That could happen today. And so I want to be prepared for that. So how did I prepare for that? Well, I have a life insurance policy that, at least is going to allow no one to have to pay my bills after I'm gone,
Right. Right.
It's just being
reduces
prepared.
The fear and the anxiety of that situation by, like you're saying, having some preparedness about that possible situation.
Right. And we have to remind ourselves that people in your life every day are, at least as far as you perceive them, a lot of times are going to be perceived, at least in your mind, as difficult or making your life difficult. And that shouldn't surprise us. It just shouldn't surprise us, but we have to question that, and we have to learn from it, and we have to move on and make ourselves better of that. And then we also have to acknowledge our part in that.
Right.
You
right.
know?
And probably 99% of the time, it's like you're saying, your perception of it being difficult or of them being difficult or making it difficult.
Yeah. Seneca goes on and says, we should contemplate events in advance so that nothing ever takes us by surprise in this way. So it's the memento mori, remember your death, like contemplating that. What does that do for you? That helps you get your shit done and be a better human. It helps you live the best life you can now.
Yeah. Being intentional.
That's one of my, I don't know, beefs with Christianity. I feel like I feel like a lot of, or with religions. Now I shouldn't single out Christianity, religions in general, because what they're doing is they're like, in a sense, they're saying, oh, this life is hard and difficult, but after it's gone, then the good stuff happens.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
so in a sense, they're shortchanging themselves on this life. You
Right.
know, it's almost like telling a poor person, and this is what a lot of religious texts do, a poor person or somebody who was born at a disadvantage, that, you know, don't worry about it too much because the next life is better. I think when you tell somebody that, they kind of have like this relaxed way of going through life that doesn't allow them to get out of that situation they are and like take life by the balls and get
Right.
the most out of it.
Right.
Because you're just thinking, oh, you know, poor is me, woe is me, you know, when I die, things will be better.
Yeah. Well, in that same sense, I would say that the Stoics don't have much place for the question of, is this fair? Because fairness is just kind of debilitating. And
Right.
that example that you just said, it really doesn't matter, unfortunately.
Right. Right. Yeah. It does. Yeah, right. It doesn't matter exactly. So you also hit on, you know, take, you know, kind of like the view from above, like looking at the big picture of things, you know, stop making events in your life bigger problems than they really are. Right.
Right.
So when we're confronted with stress, and this is easier said than done, so I do think all this takes practice. When you're confronted with something, okay, so you got coronavirus, it's illogical to be like, oh my God, I'm gonna die, da 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 da. You know, it's not illogical to prepare for your death, that's for sure.
Mm.
But it doesn't mean that you need to relegate yourself to, okay, now, you know, my life is over.
Right.
You know, and then I would even, let's go back further, like in the 80s when the AIDS epidemic and that was going on, people who got HIV and, you know, subsequently turned into AIDS, essentially that was a death sentence. Okay, so it is a death sentence. Let's say whatever you have, or cancer, whatever it is a death sentence. Is it logical to create more suffering in your internal state by saying, oh my God, I'm going to die, when you can actually control that? What if
Right.
you took the time that you have on the planet, which is very minute by any measure, it doesn't matter whether you live 1,000 years, 100 years, or 50 years, or 30 years, it still goes by in a blink of an eye.
Mhm.
Don't you want to use that time as best you can than, you know, stressing and being in fear mode?
Right. Right.
And there's an evolutionary aspect to that fear mode, but I don't think it serves us well today. And that's why I really love the Stoic philosophy on this. It's like, you know, the chronic stressors that we're under, if you're constantly living in fear about that, you're losing resilience. I mean, you're losing resilience not only mentally, emotionally, but physically. I mean, think about what's happening to your immune system when you're under a ton of stress too, right? Especially when we're talking about illness.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. Well, so it's nice to sit and kind of philosophize about it, and all these sayings are great. But in the nitty gritty of the moment, Keoni, how are you ensuring that you're kind of using this? You know, I forget which Stoic philosopher it was, but kind of came up with that theory of alive time versus dead time. And then how are you kind of choosing this period? Like we'll use the quarantine, for example, using it as a live time versus dead time. And I can think of an example in history of just like Malcolm X. So Malcolm X was imprisoned and he essentially gave himself like a college education while in prison, reading every day. And, you know, that would be a great example of a lifetime. So how are you choosing or staying mindful in the moment throughout this quarantine situation to choose a lifetime?
Well, one of the things is, you know, what me and you are doing with this podcast, you know, helping educate, not only ourselves, but others on stuff like this. I also think one of the things that is very interesting when you have so-called downtime, and a lot of us have more time on our hands than we'd probably want at this point, but when you have downtime, you know, if you allow it to happen, your creativity can flourish.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me think of Newton, right? Sir Isaac Newton, who came up with his theories of gravity and all that actually during a plague when he isolated himself in a farmhouse.
Yeah.
So getting back and enjoying the better things in life, like enjoying, you know, family time and stuff.
Yeah.
What's that saying? Like nobody's ever been on their deathbed, at least that I know of, and worried about, oh, I wish I would have made more money. You know, it's
Yeah.
usually like I wish I would have taken that trip or that vacation, or I wish I would have truly enjoyed the time that I had with loved ones when I really had the means and the health to do so.
Sure.
You know.
Well, how do you go about like it when you find that you've kind of swayed, Keoni, and that you've gotten yourself off course? As far as getting yourself back on course, what is there? Do you read something? Is there an exercise that you do? Do you just take note of it and immediately correct the situation, or how do you go about kind of ensuring that you're maintaining that progression?
Right. Well, again, going back to what we talked about, right? Reminding ourselves of our place in the world, reminding ourselves of the worst possible scenario, reminding ourselves that we're going to be confronted with negative stuff. When you are confronted with a decision, asking yourself what your hero will do. What is the right thing? It kind of gives you a moral compass. It can be with everyday things, right? So if I'm confronted with trash on the ground when I go walk every day, which is also another thing that I do, but when I walk every day, if I'm confronted on there, what would my hero do? Well, he'd probably pick up the trash. Not my trash. I didn't put it there, but my hero or mentor would probably just pick it up and throw it away
Mm,
at the next,
yeah.
that type of thing. So it's really, it's reflecting. It's kind of the meditation aspect of philosophy. What would you do in a particular situation? For me personally, um I really like active rest. So I really like walking. I really like walking and asking myself questions about these things. How can I be better? How can I live a more fulfilling life? And I usually do that with my that I do, or through my exercise most days, which, by the way, we know clears your mind. And the research on exercise and any type of virus, but especially coronavirus, is really kind of amazing. I mean, they're showing that exercise really helps possibly prevent it, but also helps in treatment. So moving helps a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. What did the Stoics say about anger, Keoni? A lot of people at home right now may be angry about, something they regret or wish they did, or maybe, they changed their stock portfolio or wish they had before this all happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, not don't live in the past. What's done is done. If your stock portfolio has plummeted or been cut in half, it's time to move. It's time to move on. How can you see a benefit from that? Some people say, like, well, that's the time. If you have some cash in to put some in right now, since it's a down market. Looking at the market logically, especially if you're in it for the long term, is the market will always go back up. It will always come back up. So always just trying to look at the positive aspect of things is really what I try to do, and what the Stoics try to teach. Doesn't mean you're emotionless. I mean, it's fine being angry,
Right.
but put it in perspective. It's fine being depressed. It's fine. Being anxious about things, but let's really put it in perspective
Yeah.
instead of blowing it out of proportion. The other thing that I think is important is, again, it's like focusing on the positive things about that are going to come out of all of this. Like, I'm not so sure with the whole coronavirus. I just don't think we're going to go back to living the way we were. I think a lot of things will change. I mean, maybe after 10 to 20 years or whatever, things may come back to what they were in, before the 2020. But I think, what we can do now is we kind of all been slapped in the face with knowing that these viruses and these pandemics are a real issue. And at least our generation, hopefully subsequent generations, are going to learn from it. We should have learned with the Spanish flu, instead of relaxing things. Like, we should have been totally prepared. So being prepared for the next one is a great benefit that's going to come out of this.
And that goes along with what we were saying earlier about kind of meditating on the worst possible situation and crafting a plan or
That's
understanding
right.
the outcomes of that.
Right. And our, we need to do that not only as individuals, but this is really, a government's job to do, is to, that's what government should be doing, is thinking about the worst case scenarios and having a plan in place before it even happens. And this is where I think our country kind of dropped the ball. We just were not prepared like we should have been.
True.
It was a lot of talk. It was a lot of talk. You heard politicians in the past before our current president saying, that we need to be prepared. But it was just like, it's like, when it's not happening, why put resources to it? And unfortunately that mindset is not helpful. You're going to be doing more damage control once it hits with that type of mindset. So you have to be prepared. So we have to know that it's a real danger. Just like on the individual level, you are going to be confronted with things that are not, perceived to be fair.
Right.
By you. You may be, going through an eviction. You may be getting kicked out of school. You may be have a really bad diagnosis, but they can never take away from you how you think about that, how you perceive it, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm curious what you think about anger. If the Stoics, and my reading, or at least my studying so far, it feels like in Stoic philosophy, anger is pretty much never has any positive to it. Then I think about, maybe like playing a football game. If you get angry at the other player, there may be a positive to it. Do you think that anger can be productive? And if so, how do you use it, process it, and whatnot?
Yeah. I think anger can be productive if it's guided, right? I mean, to me, anger, you can think of anger as an emotional release. So in that aspect, it may help with like reducing stress. The problem with anger is most people cannot think clearly when angry.
Right.
That's the big issue with it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine to feel angry, but can you be logical and not be irrational with your anger? That's the key. It's like, anger can turn a bad situation into a whole lot worse situation. I think about, somebody, I don't know.
Well, I think of this quote: "A vessel that holds acid is more destroyed than anything it pours acid on." So that would kind of,
right.
the acid being anger in that situation.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
just I agree with you.
Yeah.
And so far, my reading
That's
so
a great.
far.
That's a great quote. I mean, I love that. I just think we have to anger. I think anger can be used to motivate, but it has to be tempered, and that energy can be directed in a positive way.
Yeah.
Like you can be angry at at a person or a situation, but can you use that anger to learn from it? Can you use that anger to be rational in how you confront it? That's the thing.
Yeah.
And I actually think, can you step back? Can your anger allow you to step back from being just completely reactionary? Can you step back from it and be like, okay, so this happened. I've, taken my Stoic philosophy and putting it, I prepared for this because I kind of meditated on, most days about being confronted with things. It's really not that big of a deal right now. And besides, I have my own internal state that I can control, that type of thing. I can certainly be angry, but I can direct that energy into something more positive. So how would it serve Malcolm X, right, who was put in prison, to just be angry about it the whole time? And how did he direct that energy? I mean, he basically did better than a PhD. I mean, from what I understand, he read the dictionary from cover to cover, and knew every word in it.
The more we discuss it, though, the more it seems like it's not anger. Anytime it becomes productive, it's a change.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're you're changing it. Yeah, you're definitely changing it. You can use that. You're changing it in a way to direct energy to make the world, you know, hopefully a better place. You know, like put your anger into, okay, you see things going wrong or things you don't agree with, you can certainly put that to make the world a better place. Which, by the way, I want to bring this up, which I'm on Facebook a lot, I get debates and everything. And the one thing I have to remind myself about that is my worldview, and I think everybody needs to do, my worldview is not the right worldview. It's my worldview.
Right.
Right? It's only my worldview. It's
Right.
not the right worldview. And I should take comfort in the fact that other people have their worldviews, right? Especially if they're not infringing on my rights, you know, or anything like that. They have their opinions. And this kind of hits on what Marcus Aurelius kind of said. Hey, they're part of this cosmic fishbowl we're all in. They have a reason to be here and have something to contribute, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I think another mistake is with a lot of people. A lot of people think, and I've been accused of this myself, but I really don't think this, or at least I have to remind myself that my worldview is the right one to go by. I mean, if we had to say what worldview is right, well, the best worldview seems to have a mix of a bunch of worldviews, and having a mix makes things better. So everybody has their place. That's the other thing we have to remind ourselves. Everybody has their place, and most non-insane people, which is the majority of us, all they're out there doing is trying to, ultimately, if you ask somebody, is to make the world a better place in their own little part of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly be happy and better themselves, I mean, at the very least.
Right. Or, you know, to provide for their family, yada, 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 you know, that type of thing. That's why I feel like this is why picking a role model can really help. And I think some like religious figures, Buddha, I definitely think Jesus is another good role model for people in terms of, if you step back and ask what he would do in certain situations, I think it will help you live a better life, especially if you're a Christian.
Yeah.
You know, I certainly, you know, again, in my mind, I just, you know, my view of somebody like Jesus is not about, you know, well, that guy did me wrong, let me go pick up a gun and shoot him. You know, that's that's not the Jesus that most people perceive Jesus to be, right?
I mean, not when you're turning water to wine. Right. It's everybody's favorite party animal.
That's right. You know, just want to have fun and you know, just want to have fun and live in this world with a lot of other people and try to understand people, and don't have the arrogance of thinking that your way is the right way. So.
Yeah. Is there anything, Keoni, just in this coronavirus time, because you own a business, obviously there are a lot of things up in the air as far as how the business will go or that sort of thing in the midst of all of this. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you feel like has been extremely beneficial during this time for kind of, one, keeping your sanity, and two, just keeping you on the right path and focused, and, you know, using that alive time, being productive, finding the opportunities in this time, that sort of thing?
I mean, as far as my business goes, I mean, I'm under stress, just like I think a lot of people are with their small businesses and stuff. You know, things have certainly slowed down. You know, and the thing that I think is really neat is people are finding new ways to do business. I certainly am. I mean, we're doing a lot of stuff online, which is helping quite a bit. And other new ways to innovate. I think when you have things that are shaking you up like this, you have to rethink how you're going to do things and how you're living life. It hasn't been too much of a discomfort, at least on my end, as far as like some of the things that we change in our life. So for example, at the clinic, we're doing a lot of video conferencing, food shopping now. We basically order it, gets dropped off at our front doors. I mean, that's not something we did a lot of. We didn't. We used to go to food stores quite a bit. There are certain things that I think all of us are doing better now, that I think we're going to see flu numbers go down, and we are starting to see some good things about the flattening of the curve of coronavirus, and that's just people being more aware of washing their hands, maybe taking their shoes off at the front door.
Well, what I hear you saying about you specifically, Keoni, is a lot more enabling versus disabling. And
Yeah.
something I've been mulling over a lot. I'm waiting to take like the board exam for physical therapy. I was supposed to take that April 28th. Long hubbubaloo about will it get canceled? Will it not get canceled? Got it canceled. Right. They only offer it 4 times a year. What's the situation now? The board is messing up with the testing centers, and it's just a huge clusterfuck in reality. And it's super stressful, and I feel super disabled. Right. And that comes with its own insecurities and challenges in itself. And then the only way I find that I'm able to correct that is by enabling myself in some sort of way. So if that's making the decision that, well, I'm going to actually cancel my own exam and schedule it for a later date and figure out the next 3 months on my own, or whatever that looks like, finding that enabling, like you're saying, with like finding new ways to do business, like finding a way to incorporate telehealth or ordering the groceries, just finding a way to be more enabled than disabled by this situation in which it feels like we've been so disabled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could see how it does feel that way. Yeah, using your time, if you can't take the board exam, or you can't graduate on time, like I know a lot of people can't now, when school's out of session, is using that time to study, make sure that you pass the board exam when you are able to take it, and don't conflate the issue to being like, well, I'll never become the doctor that I thought I was going to be, or whatever it may be, or I'll never get my degree like I thought I would be. To me, that's illogical. That's not going to happen. I mean, we're already innovating education in many, many ways, right? So a lot of education is being done at home now, and that's going to keep improving. So use your downtime like Newton did, like Malcolm X did. I think history is full of other examples of that. Use your downtime to make sure that when you can take it and life goes back to normal, at least in that sense, that you're going to get through it, instead of being pissed off and going, woe is me, I'm not going to be able to get my degree, or
exactly. And just even
life has stopped
in that immediate time, just enabling yourself, where it really does feel like, we're so disabled by the regulations or whatever the case may be. The situation is completely out of my control. There's nothing I can do about the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy. So there's literally nothing I can do. So the only thing I can do is enable myself by just making the best choice for me. And that's the only way, honestly, in the past handful of years, that I've found some comfort in, these situations, like being a student or being an intern, where you have like very little control seemingly. But the reality is you always have options. The options may not be attractive, but flat out, there are literally always options.
Right.
And you find comfort in the fact that you pick the option, again, even if it's not attractive. In this situation, if you lose your job, do you go work for whatever app it is and deliver groceries, or are you focusing on staying at home on your health? Neither of those options look great, really. One of them, they both come at a cost, but it's just really enabling yourself on the decision of what cost are you going to pay.
Right. And unenabling yourself is then, okay, I lost my job. How am I going to feed my family? We're all going to starve to death.
And I'm going to sit here and wait for the stimulus check. That's never
right. Right. Or I'm going to go rob a store, or I'm going to go do whatever, I mean, I get that. I get that anxiety, I totally get that. But in the reality, if you don't, let's not conflate things unless it comes to that. It's like, why stress over the day of your death if it's not here yet, right? That's not a good thing to do. It's not helpful. You can contemplate it, and therefore today and here and now in your living years, be the best person that you can. But why stress over something that hasn't really happened yet? Okay, fine. So you lost your job. you can put that stress or that energy or that anger into, okay, I'm going to make sure I get another job. Or, this is interesting. I always wanted to do this. How about I do this? I want to help people that are on the front line somehow. I mean, a lot of my patients are making face masks right now for people. I actually, the other day, a high school kid I got delivered to my office was it's great. I mean, it's a real simple thing he did, but he gave me and he hands them out. He's online, but a face shield that he made out of two plastic pieces that fits great. Put his energy into that. It's just, it is illogical no matter what situation you find. You just have to remind yourself. And I think the more you remind yourself, the better you are at it. But it's illogical to make it worse than it really is. You have control of the internal events, not external events. And that we need to realize that. Remind yourself of that. You can't control that this virus happened.
Mm-hmm.
You can prepare
Right.
for it. You can make sure you do all the social distancing, wash your hands, and everything that you can to make sure that you won't get it. But there's no guarantee that you won't get that. So what are you going to do if you do get it? How did you contemplate that? Okay, so if you do get it, what do you do? How can you make yourself better? Well, one thing is you can educate yourself like anything on this coronavirus. That's kind of the thing, me and you were doing with the last few podcasts that we did. I learned a lot in the last few weeks on these podcasts, like simple vitamin D, simple exercise, getting appropriate sleep, that type of thing all helps boost your immune system. I think education is key for me, at least, like educating yourself on the situation. And then how you can, it enables you to confront it in a rational way.
Yeah. And even if things are, scary to look at in the macro sense right now, if you just look 3 months out or so, and look at this time right now, what would make you, I guess, proud or happy that you were able to accomplish or do or be a part of, even if it's like, for me, part of it's just hanging out with my girlfriend a little bit more during this time. But just kind of having that thought throughout this period, as opposed to ruminating in the negative of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, turn this shit around, right? Like, I remember when I was in school, I was thrilled to find the weekend. Well, now you have a long weekend, a very long weekend, most of us,
Mm-hmm.
that we don't know is going to end. Enjoy that time. We really should enjoy that time. Read more. Do some of the things that you want to do. Do some of the things that you want to do around the house.
Find that alive time.
But yeah, find that alive time.
Enable yourself.
Going back on another point that we had here was, look into your hero and kind of asking your hero what they would do. There's an interesting study that a researcher did. We actually talked about him on one of our dieting food podcasts. Anyway, his name's Brian Wansink. Anyway, he talked about emotional eating and physical eating. Anyway, he said one very simple trick to do with kids before they eat a meal is to ask what kind of food they want to eat, and ask, like, what would Batman do, or what would their favorite superhero eat? Anyway, just asking that question made them eat more fruits and vegetables than they normally
There you go.
than they normally would, because they'd be like, oh, well, my superhero,
Yeah.
Popeye, he'll eat more spinach, so I'm gonna eat spinach.
Yeah.
Type of thing. But yes, this type of stuff works in both adults and children.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. One of my favorite stories kind of about that, Keoni, is From Obstacles the Way, is where I heard it, about Demosthenes. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but so he was an orator in like the 4th century. Inherited a large amount of money from his family. His family ended up passing, and then of course the guardians of him mishandled his fortune. He was born with a speech impediment, and apparently he wasn't very athletic or healthy. He had a quote unquote delicate physique, is how they described it. So not something you want in the 4th century.
Right.
And he reportedly went and basically practiced orating with pebbles in his mouth while running up hills to like perfect the speech, or to to correct this speech impediment. And then at one point, this kind of reminds me of finding that alive time and almost forcing it. He shaved reportedly half of his head, so he would be forced to stay inside and continue his study and not be distracted by like wanting to go out or that sort of thing. I was just thinking about that during this time of just because it's hard while you're trapped at home to find that productivity, and I'm trying to be more like Demosthenes.
Yeah, well, think about the life that Demosthenes was born into, right?
Right.
Like, and what he was born with, and
Right.
how he overcame it. Another wonderful Stoic was Epictetus, right? He was born into slavery. He was
Right.
born a slave, and some of his quotes are just amazing with that. He held no anger towards his slaveholders or anything like that. What he tried to do was make his slave life the best that he could be. Eventually, because of him doing that, he broke those chains of slavery and became one of the greatest Stoic philosophers ever. He's actually probably, well, I would have to say he probably is my favorite Stoic philosopher. But Epictetus, yeah, born into slavery, and look at the history that he's made. I mean, we're still talking about him now. Yeah. So, yeah, it's fascinating. Make the best of the situation, and be realistic about it and be rational about it. Again, it's not like being completely pessimistic or being overly optimistic either. I mean, I think either of those two extremes can get you into trouble, because on one hand, if you're too optimistic, well, you may not prepare for a bad time. And if you're so pessimistic about things, I can just see yourself like
paralyzed by fear.
Yeah, you're paralyzed by fear. It's like that third stage of adrenal stress where you just beat the horse with a whip and the horse just lays there, can't get up anymore. And refuses to get up, because it's basically saying, well, my life sucks and it's always going to be this way. So, I'm relegating myself to this misery.
Yeah.
And I'm in. So yeah, I love Stoic philosophy. I think no matter what religious denomination you follow or whatever philosophical way of life you follow, I think knowing about Stoicism can really enhance a person's life.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially after we did quite a few coronavirus topics, I figured we'd come in here and spread some optimism, and this stuff's very useful. And it's been very useful for me during the last month or so. So for the people listening to this, I just hope it's helpful. We're right here with you, and we really appreciate you listening, of course, and being a part of this with us.
Before we get off, let me just remind people. So we talked about Stoicism with Jade. That was episode 13 of the Wellman's podcast. Great book, How to Be a Stoic, by Massimo Pugliucci. I know I'm Italian and I can't even pronounce that name, but Massimo Pigliucci is probably the correct way. Obstacles Away by Ryan Holiday.
Yes.
Check out Philosophize This podcast. It's awesome. I mean, he really, I think his name is Stephen West. He does an incredible job. Episode 55, they talk about Stoicism throughout a lot of those episodes, but Massimo is on that episode, and there's some good TED Talks on Stoic philosophy too, one of which Massimo did. Just to reiterate, I think Stoicism it's a philosophy. It's provides a rich, armamentarium of strategies and techniques for developing like psychological resilience in very, very stressful times. When the world seems like it's collapsing, and man, you look around, there's a lot to be worried about. But if you focus on some of the good stuff about it and take that nervous energy or that angry energy and redirect it into being positive and optimistic, you're gonna have that resilience that I think all of us need. Yeah. And it takes practice. It definitely takes practice. So that's why I really like those daily reminders.
Yeah,
That's really
absolutely.
why I like, I think Ron Holiday also
The
did
Daily
the Daily
Stoic.
Stoic, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. That's a great book because in that book, he has sayings in there. You read one each day, and it kind of hits on, a lot of stuff that we just talked about.
Yeah, it's like a saying of one of the philosophizers that one of the philosophizers we've discussed, and then he'll break it down like two
Right.
paragraphs or so a day.
Yeah.
Really interesting. And it's just it while everything seems like it's crumbling around you, I think of all the stuff that was also happening like in the 1910s, or all the good things that came out of those time periods as well, even seemingly while the world, take World War II as an example. While the world was seemingly falling completely apart, all the things that came from that. Or not even
Right.
5 years later, Disney came out with Alice in Wonderland or something like that. Like, it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah. Yeah.
it, things go on, or things overall we've displayed as humanity quite a bit of resilience in our previous history. I've been holding on to that.
Yep, and there's a great book that we talked about before called Enlightenment Now, right?
Mm,
That book looks at all the parameters of basically the things that are going on in the world, disease states, people living better lives, on and on and on, and at almost every single parameter except with I think one here in the United States. Um, but every single parameter, health is better, people are living better lives, wages are better, especially when you look way back, things are getting better. Out of this is we're going to be better prepared for the next one, which is definitely going to come. We're going to know how to cope better. So there's a lot to be optimistic about when you look at the big picture of things. And the only negative thing that in that book that I think came back with was the income disparity
mm,
gap was getting wider, but it was still better than what was way back when, from what I understand. But knowing where the bad things are, you're able to work on and making them better. So there's a lot to be optimistic about, and I think that's what we should put our focus on.
yeah, we found lights at the end of the tunnel before, and we've gotten there, and we'll get there again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
All right, everybody, we'll talk with you next week. Thank you for listening. Be well.
Yep. Thank you. Take care.